Meeting. It's the meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee. This is a special meeting on Thursday, December 15th, 2021. We're meeting in the first floor conference room at Sullivan Independence Hall, as well as remotely via Zoom. We have via Zoom committee members Joanne Romano-Kazanka, Carrie Mackover, Heather Dabowski. We also have our planning consultant, Glenn Chalder. I see with us Herb Linecooler from Fairfield Senior Advocates. In the room, we have Chairman Steve Grasswall, Gretchen Grosner, our recording secretary, and our newest member, Gwyn Alperovich.
Yes.
Okay, and Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development for the town. We also have a few members of the public joining us this evening as well.
I want to ask that one to identify themselves.
I think there's one number, 203-331-5485. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please feel free to do so for our meeting minutes, and then we'll ask you to mute for the presentation. But
yeah, hi, it's Bob Ellinger, Fairfield Senior Advocate.
oh, hey Bob, how are you?
Okay.
You're anonymous tonight, okay?
That's right, not anymore. I'll mute. Thanks.
Nina, do we know?
We also have Nina, if you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Nina Velez.
Hi, Nina. Thank you for joining. With that, I'll turn it back to the chairman for the rest of the meeting. So,
Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Mark. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is our first hybrid meeting, in person and Zoom at the same time. So I'm expecting there'll be a glitch or two, so please bear with us. Because of the setup, only members of the committee will be able to ask questions in the majority of the meeting. Depending on how it flows, we might open it up to everyone. Those who are not in the room, well, actually those in the room too, if you have a question, raise your hand. So that there's probably a hand raise feature, but that won't work for us, I don't think.
Yeah, it would. It would if you use that or put it in the chat. I'll be able to see it. But
so multiple ways that you can
or you can
be
just
recognized. Yeah. So good. So we will get started, and first we'd like to welcome Gwyn. And Gwyn, you want to just say a few words about?
Sure. So. Yes. So my name is Gwyn Alperovich. I'm a Fairfield resident, lifetime resident. I, went to college in Boston, lived in Manhattan for several years, and came back here to raise family with my husband. And I started getting involved when I ran for RTM in District 5. Didn't pan out well, but, gave it my best try. And I'm happy to be here. I think it's a very important committee to be on. And I'm looking forward to learning more from all of you as well.
Great, thanks. And you were born and raised here?
I was, yeah.
Went to school in town?
I went to Fairfield Public School. It was Ward.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yes.
So a few years ago, we had a couple of members older than you who had been here for like 70 years, and so they saw the transition of the town. So it's good to have somebody who's been here and also has seen some of the transition.
There's a lot of changes, definitely.
Yeah. So let's go to the minutes. If I could get a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move that we approve the minutes as presented.
And Joanne, are you okay seconding that?
That's fine.
All right. Is there any discussion, corrections, additions? Hearing none. All those in favor, raise the hand. Yes, I can tell it passes unanimously.
Yeah. If you want to abstain or.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm raising my hand because,
Okay.
Oh, that's
yeah, because we're supposed to, right?
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
But do you want Gwen to?
No, it doesn't matter to me. I don't.
No, it's unanimous.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
all that counts.
Okay. The meeting schedule.
Yeah, this is the one organizational matter before us this evening. The town clerk requires committees, boards, and commissions to approve a meeting schedule and submit that to the town clerk prior to the beginning of the new year. And so this is continuing our current meeting schedule, which is typically the second Wednesday of each month at 7 o'clock. We typically meet in the second floor conference room at the Old Town Hall. They may not be possible, and so if we need to, we can always switch to another meeting room that does have this capability. The Old Town Hall conference room doesn't have technological advancements that we do here in Sullivan Independence Hall, but we're working on it.
Yep.
So, and we'll continue to have to meet remotely as well, so at least a hybrid, when circumstances permit.
And did you sensitize the
I
date?
did. I tried to avoid, I looked at any municipal holidays, looked at religious holidays and observances,
Mhm.
and I think I avoided them. But if anyone notices anything, I'm certainly willing to admit that I may have.
We can always amend it.
We can always amend it,
Yeah.
and we often do, so.
Right. So do you need this approved?
I do.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the calendar of the 2022 meeting schedule?
Joanne is raising her hand.
I was trying to talk, but this computer is not giving me any good time tonight. Yes, I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so next on the
Do
agenda.
you want to vote on it?
Oh, yes, I'm
Minor
sorry.
detail, yeah.
If there's, I'll open it up for discussion first, but if there's no discussion, we can go right to the vote. And those in favor, raise your hand. All in favor? Any opposed? Any absent?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
And, we traditionally have an election of officers, either at this meeting or the January meeting. It's completely up to the board.
mhm,
We can, we can have an election, somebody can make a motion to continue the current, arrangement. It's up to you guys, so
and so I'm open to, whatever anybody wants to do. If you wanted to do it this month or next month, there's no hard and fast on that.
yeah, I will say Steve is the chair and Cindy is the vice chair, and I believe Cindy is term limited
Yeah,
and, will need to be, supplanted or replaced.
Yes.
So we at least have an opening for vice chair.
yeah. And, but Cindy's, can she vote?
She can vote,
Yeah, so she can still work on the plan.
yep.
And she can vote. So,
I'm going to say that we should continue for a month. We've got too many people missing tonight.
I agree.
Yeah, let's just go into next month.
Yeah,
Okay.
it wouldn't be fair to do that without everybody here
Yeah, or as many people as we can get.
as possible.
Yep.
okay,
That works for me.
Yep.
So on to the main event.
yeah. And the main event is Glenn.
Glenn, I think I extended, sharing, privileges to you, so feel free to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Where did I put it? Bear with me for a second here.
I know, can I
You can take it.
take it and give it to Gwen?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just the outline.
Okay.
Yeah, and do you need a piece of paper you want to take?
Sure, if you can, yeah, that would be great.
You got a pen?
I have a pen, yes, I'll be more prepared than this.
It's okay, this is being recorded, so you can always go back and check the notes. Glenn, oh, there he goes.
There you go. Sorry.
Thank
Guess I had more things open on my desktop than I realized. Evening, everybody. I'm hoping tonight that we can work our way through the outline, revised outline of the Affordable Housing Plan, and hopefully get the green light to start crafting a document that we can then review at the next meeting in January. Based on the feedback from the committee at the meeting in November, I've made some adjustments and refinements to the plan, the organization, the outline of it, and just kind of walk everybody through that. And then we'll talk about whether or not we're ready to actually start crafting the plan. Not much changed in the introductory portions of the plan in terms of a cover letter and talking about how the affordable housing situation has evolved. Yep.
Glenn? Yeah,
Yep.
can I ask a quick question? Mark, did you and Glenn meet with TP&Z since the last meeting? So this has the TP&Z
Staff,
staff.
yes, input, yes,
Okay, good.
sorry.
That's all. Sorry, Glenn. Just
That's
wanted to-
okay. No, it's important. I figured we'd get there in a minute. So the first page or two of the outline has not really changed much. I think one of the observations at our meeting back in November was that the goals didn't seem particularly well organized, and there seemed to be too many of them. So I've distilled them down to 6 major goals, which are identified here overall. And the strategies fall within these 6 overall goals. The first of which is to increase the number of assisted housing units in Fairfield. Second major goal is to increase the number of deed restricted housing units in Fairfield. The third is to maintain and improve oversight and administration of deed restricted units. 4 is continue to seek moratorium exemptions from the Affordable Housing Appeals procedure. 5 is additional approaches for providing for housing diversity. And then 6 is maintaining and enhancing other affordable housing programs. And I think the end result of reorganization is that section 2 ended up being sort of the major focal point for the materials and things that we're going to be talking about here this evening. We did, as Mark indicated, meet with the planning and zoning staff. And one of the comments that came from them is that some of the strategies which are in here address the issues related to affordable housing, and those are identified in the following pages by this purple box. And some of the strategies which are in this plan also increase the range of overall housing choices in Fairfield and provide for different types of housing, which can be naturally affordable, but not necessarily deed restricted. And those have the green box. So we'll see those coming up as we move along.
Yeah, Glenn, another question. The 6 goals, in the 2014 plan, we had 11 goals at the end of the plan.
Yep.
Are these 6 gonna be set up that same way? Are these what we're shooting for, or there's gonna be more specificity when we get to a goals section?
I think that's the next section, Steve.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
so for example, on the next page, we now get into the first set of strategies. The first strategy, or excuse me, the first goal is to increase the number of assisted housing units. And within that umbrella on this page, there are 2 main strategies. So I've started off here on the left-hand side. I've given an overview of what assisted housing is so that people are familiar with what that is, why it's important for Fairfield. Assisted housing is the main way to reach affordability levels at 50% of area median income and below. These are often people that have the greatest need for housing, people who are struggling in the current housing market. And it's hard at those levels of affordability. So generally, assisted housing such as the Housing Authority or nonprofit or private enterprises receiving state or federal funding are the best ways to address this housing need. So the 2 strategies that are in here is to assist the Housing Authority in their efforts to create assisted housing, helping them obtain land and get funding. They have several projects in the works at the present time and some other sites and locations that they're looking at and thinking of. And I think these types of developments can provide a higher percentage of affordable units at deeper levels of affordability, and give us housing unit equivalent points that would help Fairfield on its journey towards housing moratorium. And then the second strategy is guiding other entities developing assisted housing. And again, with low income housing tax credits and other types of programs, this could be an area where, again, we could receive housing unit equivalent points.
The one observation I made to Glenn when we met with TP&Z staff, if you look closely at those communities that have achieved moratorium or have a substantial inventory of affordable housing units. The vast majority of those units are assisted housing. And, assisted housing, you know, working with entities like Operation Hope, Parish Court, the Fairfield Housing Authority, typically, we're talking about the majority, if not the entirety, of the development being affordable. And, affordable in perpetuity, or darn well close to it. So, this is a way in which we can provide for our affordable housing needs long-term. And, you know, that's what stood out to me when looking at our inventory and looking at our efforts to obtain a moratorium, is that we're trying to do it we're trying to do it from a variety of different strategies, because we can't, we don't have a big inventory of assisted units here. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to do it when 10% or 20% or 30% of these units are affordable and the rest are market rate. So I just wanted to make that observation.
Joanne, was your hand up? No, okay. So any thoughts or questions on this page? I think this, is an important one, but pretty straightforward, I think, overall.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean,
Go ahead, Karen.
AHC obviously refers to Affordable Housing Committee up there, and then down below we have staff. That's Mark. And is that all really possible, or does this start, I mean, you know, it sounds to me like we're going to have more staff at some point, and does that become a recommendation or just a reality?
Well,
I'm
I
okay
think,
with putting HC there.
No, but that's a good question, and at some point, I do think you're gonna need more staff. You know,
Yeah.
as the number of units increase. And who starts that conversation? Do we start talking to you, or do we talk to the first select woman, or?
Or do we
how's
talk
that-
to the Charter Commission? You know, I mean, I don't know. I was thinking about that.
Probably all of the above.
Yeah,
Yeah, all of the above? Okay.
Mike and I will talk more about that in the future.
Yeah.
I made a
Yeah,
note, and we'll come back to that in the section I think it's most applicable in.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and modify the leader partner here. I think Carrie brings up a good point. Part of this is, some of these development activities are going to go through the normal development process. And so trying to guide them to appropriate locations and designs is both going to be, I think, staff, planning and zoning staff plus Mark, but also involve the Affordable Housing Commission looking at it. And I think planning and zoning as well. So I'll modify the leader partner here to reflect that.
Okay.
Mark, did you speak with Carol at all at the Housing Authority? You know, this is our first strategy.
I will.
And,
Sure, she'll agree with it.
yeah, okay.
And I did reach out to Carol to understand what's in the pipeline for the future, because, I mean, I think that's really sort of the issue here. So I agree with Mark's assessment on this as well. So the next strategy is increasing the number of deed restricted affordable housing units. This is the one that I think, as Mark indicated, can be a challenge. How do we create deed restricted units? At the present time, they can be created by private developers who invoke the 830G process and provide 30% of the units as affordable. And Steve, you circulated an article from, the project which is being proposed across the street from Pine Tree, or around the corner, diagonally across the street, if you will, from Pine Tree. So that's an 830G type development, but we also have some situations in the zoning regulations, particularly in the transit-oriented locations where affordable housing is required at different percentages, such as 10%, or in the transit park, I think it's 12%. So how do we go about doing this? And so those recommendations and strategies have been collected here. And we talk about how we can create deed restricted units. So the front page here is just an example of some of the different types which are on the inventory list for Fairfield. And I can work with Mark to get pictures that are the ones that we would like to present here. the first strategy is to talk about increasing the affordability set aside for all zoning approaches. Right now in the regulations, we have a set aside that ranges between 10 or 20%. And the Affordable Housing Appeals procedure is 30%. And the question is, should we have a townwide across the board standard for housing affordability, which is incorporated into the zoning regulations? And so at one time I was advocating for a percentage as high as 20%, but I think it's prudent for us to work with the Planning and Zoning Commission to try to get them to move in a direction that would increase the percentage. If units are going to get built, 10% just keeps us even in terms of our percentage. I think it's 2.47% right now. The only way we're really going to make any progress, I think, on the affordable housing percentage is the assisted housing we just talked about. But if we're going to make progress in the deed restricted area, 10%, less than 10%, we're falling behind. 10%, we're kind of staying even, and something more than 10% would allow us to catch up. Thoughts on that strategy?
This is one where we did get substantial input from planning and zoning staff. We had just completed a TOD planning study with a fairly detailed market analysis in there where they did a development pro forma, and they made a recommendation that the TOD area should be at 12%. I was pushing hard for something closer to 15. I do think 20% is a bit unrealistic in the market at present, based on what I've heard even from Norwalk and other areas. So, but I think we should advocate for more density, especially in and around transit, where we're already providing the opportunity to create more housing units in those areas. So that just makes sense to me. And the idea was we didn't want to have a situation where developers were building units without providing some allowance or set aside for affordable. And we also wanted to create an avenue, a constructive avenue, so that developers wouldn't feel necessity to go straight to 830G. So I think having an alternative makes sense, but what's the correct number? I think we should try to push it a little bit.
Well, so if we went from 10 to 12 or 10 to 15, would you then think about pushing it higher later on? I mean, my thought is, why not go to 20% across the board? And if we find in 2 years that doesn't work, then we could go back to 15, 12.
How about if we did something where, depending, like if it's this number of units, then it's 10%, or then it goes up as the number of units total get higher? Would that work, or would that just be a disincentive?
Well, I definitely agree, Carrie, with having higher set aside around in the TOD overlay area, because you're already allowing them to recoup that somewhat by providing more density than is otherwise permitted elsewhere in town. So that to me makes sense. To your question, Steve, now we're required to update our plan every 5 years. I was advocating doing something that I thought was realistic and attainable in this 5 years, which I think is more of an incremental approach, as opposed to setting a overly ambitious goal and then saying it's not working out in 5 years, we got to go back and do something. Because I just think that I don't want to push more people to 830G. I mean, I'm hoping that in the next 2 years we have a moratorium, but that only gives us 4 years of relief from the private developments under that section. So
I think it's important to state that we're never going to be out of 830G.
Correct.
It'll be one moratorium after another after another. I don't like 12%. The math is not as easy as 15. You know?
I agree.
Gwen, I mean, how do other members feel?
Well,
I like to see between 15 and 20.
Yeah, I mean, Herb's raising a question about, setting a higher set-aside linked to other, benefits. You know, I do like, it's not as clean and simple to explain, but I do like providing some flexibility, so that while we're meeting some public policy goal, the developer has some options by which to address this. I do think we should definitely have a higher threshold in the TOD overlay. That's my recommendation. But as to townwide, I think we set a
If-
limit. And even now, we're
if
seeing
you
people that are playing
start
games with
15
doing less than 10 units, so. Joanne?
Her screen looks like it's.
But if you
frozen.
see, it started 15 and then fluctuate. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
No?
You're
Oh.
breaking up, though.
Okay, so
May want to turn off your camera.
yeah, you guys are all breaking up. My thought was if you started 15, if you go between 15 and 20, smaller units with the 15, and then more units go up to the 20.
Didn't get that.
You know what I mean?
I think Joanne was advocating a
Because-
tiered approach as well, which was, you know, if you have more
Right,
units, you'll go
right,
up percentage.
yeah, same thing.
yeah.
And Glenn, what are you seeing in the other communities that you're working with?
I think this is an issue which communities are looking at and discussing. I can't tell you that I see enough direction in the tea leaves yet to give you a firm answer to your question, Steve. The thing that influenced my thought process as I was working on this is the observation from you guys, the committee in Fairfield, that you thought you were the state leader in terms of the number of affordable housing developments that are coming along with 830D. And I look at the developments and the market rate units and the prices of those in Fairfield and think that a 10% standard is not a bonus for people. I think the market and the pro forma could support. Now, granted, we're in a COVID bump right now and all the other stuff, and I have respect for Mark's analysis of the pro forma results and the other stuff. But I think that if we're going to really make a dent in affordable housing and make progress in terms of percentages and moratoria during this next 4 years, then evaluating this number and looking at a higher number, I think is a logical next step for us. So I was leaning more towards the 20%, but staff talked me back to the 12 to 15. And so I think this is going to be an issue that we could modify this little table here. For example, in the TOD areas here, we could talk about 20%, or and in other areas, we could talk about 15, or we could leave it 12 to 15 or 12 to 20. Because I think this is going to involve, this responsibility is going to come down to the Planning and Zoning Commission with our input and guidance. And so the question is, where do we want to start the conversation at?
What happens with this draft? Does it get posted or?
Well, all this is public documents, but it's a draft, so we can change this. If you'd like to just leave open the option, we'll make it 12 to 20%, and we'll decide it as we go through the process. We do more engagement, and then we'll figure out where we want to draw the line. So
Maybe
why don't we make
15
it
to
12 to
20.
20%
Maybe
right now?
15 to 20.
Make it 15 to 20. I don't. There's a couple different strategies. One is, you can put it in a high number, but the expectation as you go through the process, there might be some negotiation involved. And planning and zoning may not buy into that 15 to 20. I try to be realistic and aspirational, but realistic. But I have no problem if you want to go higher. If you want to, as long as it's reasonable.
Let's do this. Let me craft the first draft. I mean, I think that's my goal over the holidays, is to get a first draft together. I think, as we had said early on, we want to try to make it concise, visual, and strategic. And so my challenge is, trying to do this in few pages as possible without getting terribly carried away. So I'm going to go ahead with 12 to 15% here for the first, 15 to 20%, which is what we just said for the first draft. And we'll talk about that and see if we want to tweak it before we share it more widely. Sound like a plan?
Sound like a plan.
Sounds good. Glenn, I have one other suggestion. On the prior page, you've got 3 pictures. And the addresses are there, which is great. But could you identify the kind of development? The first one, I believe, is sweat equity.
That's a duplex, yeah.
Yeah, the second one is 830G, and the third one is inclusionary zoning or
Correct.
TOD. isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like it very much, and it's 3 different types of developments.
Yeah, and that's why I picked them, but I just, I'll go ahead and do that. Just, I think it's important to recognize the diversity of efforts that Fairfield has done.
27 out of 50.
So the next strategy, I think, for discussion here, strategy number 2, is to talk about increasing the length of time that affordable units are subject to deed restrictions. So we have some variations right now in our current regulations, at least 40 years, as long as the building or development exists. And I think getting to some consistent language here is probably useful, and to extend it as far as we think we're comfortable with. So we can extend the affordability to common language such as for as long as the building or development exists, but not less than 40 years or 40 years, whichever is longer. Or we can try to get a little bit more creative here and think about automatic renewals or periods longer than 40 years in terms of affordable units. Mark's database of affordable housing units shows how when some of these units were first created. Some of them are coming off the roster because the deed restrictions run out. And I think this is likely to be a continuing issue in town. So I think extending the affordability period or requiring automatic renewals or some other type of approach, I believe is a logical next step for Fairfield to consider here so that we can keep affordable housing units, deed restricted affordable housing units around longer.
I'm strongly in favor.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue with regard to the first option is, as strongly I've recommended to planning and zoning that regardless of what the language in their regulations say, I want at least, it needs to reference 40 years somewhere in the deed restriction.
Yeah.
Because that's what, I know how DOH works, and they need to see 40 years somewhere to check a box.
Yeah.
So that's important. But I would like ultimately to be able to have these things restricted longer than 40 years.
Got it.
Maybe we get this case,
It's gonna be tough, but we'll see.
Steve, what is considered, I mean, after 40 years, does an owner of an apartment or a small apartment building think, okay, it's time to tear it down and rebuild or renovate, or what goes on in the industry that 40 years is a number?
40 years is just 830G.
Yeah, but it's also in other communities, other states, and I wonder why it's 40 and not 50
Or 30.
or, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, don't forget 830G started out at 20, went to 30, and then went to 40. So, I mean, if you go back to 89, all the way back 89-311, which is the original act, the affordability period was a lot shorter. And people said, this is really silly. So I think the numbers have increased. And I think the issue that I'm most concerned about for Fairfield and other municipalities is at the end of the 40 years, there's this value increment that goes somewhere. So if a unit could have sold restricted at $200,000 or 150 or whatever the number would be, well, without the restriction, it's $300,000 or $350,000. The issue is, well, there's $100,000 or $150,000 that somebody just pocketed. And who is that? And it's whoever owns the for sale unit at that time. And I just don't think that's right. We're working hard to try to create affordable housing here. And
yeah, that's a real problem.
random people are going to walk away with $100,000. And I think the point, I believe, is that we should be looking at ways that that deed restriction is going to automatically renew. But if the unit's in terrible shape or it hasn't been maintained or something else, then, we can release the restriction at the end of the affordability period or 40 years or whatever, and put some money into the housing trust fund to create more units. Maybe not this one, or maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a real problem, because I can see people, at year 30 saying, well, I really should renovate it, but I'm not going to bother because this will all expire in 10 years and I'll make a lot of money or whatever. And there does have to be some way. And it's I can't think of it right now, but.
So I don't know what the solution is here either,
Yeah.
Carrie, but I think it's something that we should certainly think about
Yeah.
in Fairfield, because otherwise we're churning. I feel like, again, the mental image of Sisyphus rolling the ball uphill.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I think this is something that we can work on.
Okay.
And so, Glenn, I totally agree. 40 years seems like a long ways into the future, but we have experience in New York City where people thought the Mitchell-Lomond 40-year period was a long time in the future, and the future arrived, and they became luxury condos. And we don't want that to happen here.
And I also feel that there's a lot of things we just don't know in terms of demographics or how things are going to change because of pandemic or elections or whatever. There's just a big list of unknowns out there.
Yep.
As well.
So the next strategy has implications both for affordable housing and for housing options and choices. And this is reviewing and revising the provisions related to the design residence district in Fairfield. Been around for a long time. There's a number of design residence districts on the map. But the provisions that as currently exist are kind of an impediment, if you will, to the creation of affordable housing and affordable housing choices. Partly because the minimum parcel size requirements are large enough that in most zoning districts in town, it's a challenge to find a parcel where this might work. The maximum density limitations in some of the zoning districts in the Greenfield Hills and other areas of town, it's really the same as a subdivided lot. So there's really very little incentive to go there, even if it was a small multifamily development or a cottage court or something else that might fit into the neighborhood. The deed restriction is an option in the regulations as to whether or not deed restricted units are provided. You get a density bonus for doing so, a 50% density bonus. So that's fairly generous. But also people could build luxury condos and not provide any affordable units. Every time a DRD is created, it's by a zone change process. While our conversation with the Planning and Zoning Commission said that they would like to retain some level of control over multifamilies, I certainly understand that. That could be done through a special permit process as well. And then there are some other DRD provisions here. And I do think that this involves kind of a more comprehensive approach, but I think it would improve our plan to put the DRD issue squarely on the table for the update to the Plan of Conservation and Development and the zoning regulations, which the DPZ is going to be undertaking.
This is something that we've been discussing with internally for some time with TPNZ staff. The DRD overlay and density bonus provisions all predate our inclusionary zoning provision. And at one time, the underlying density was sufficient to allow this to be a really powerful tool for the creation of some of the condominium developments that you see in town that are part of the landscape. But at some point in that process, there was some concern about development happening too quickly. And so there was an effort to scale it back, and that has largely, so it has ceased to exist as a viable tool. And as a result, what we've seen now is people don't use this option at all. They go straight to 830G. So again, there has been a recognition that this is a problem. It's not a tool. It exists in name only, but it doesn't work. And so we need to revisit it in order for it to be a tool and an alternative to an 830G application. So
Could
I
we,
think
con-
any options would be good.
okay, could we consider something in the, where it says, allow DRD development in certain locations by special permit only with no zone change required? And we have for properties which front on arterial roads or collector streets. And that certainly makes sense, but could we allow something or like within 250 feet of an arterial road or collector street or some other number? For something that might just be down the street a little bit, but still appropriate? Or
I think
allow
we
combination?
absolutely, we could carry. I think that this journey that we're on is going to involve, again, the Planning and Zoning Commission. They
Yeah,
have
that's
control over their regs. So the question in a sense was, did we want to write this? Or did we want to actually get far enough along? So I think I feel comfortable adding that clause in that you just suggested here that, near. I think that there's enough special permit criteria in terms of looking at the impact on the neighborhood and everything else that, people can kind of evaluate that.
Yeah,
But I know that the composition of planning and zoning has changed a little. Mr. Wagner was chair for quite some time, and now they're going to find their way again. So I thought we got good support, but for them to carry forward on this might behoove us to start a little softer and then see how it evolves.
yeah, pick a number. When I just said 250 feet, that may be too much. Maybe it's 200 feet, or maybe it's abutting another property that's abutting a collector road, something like that.
So, Mark, do you think the DRD zones should be saved, amended and saved, or are we better off just tossing them out?
No, I think it should be amended and saved as an option. I think this actually is a precursor to the incentive housing zones that the state created. So this is kind of the incentive housing zone, but our own special way. A little different, but it's kind of the same type of concept. So
It's almost 35 years old.
it is, but I think it worked well before. And what happened was, just like we can amend the regs to either open the tap or close them, and we closed them completely.
Yeah.
So we're not getting any applications, affordable or market rate under this.
And I think in longer term, I think it could be, one of the things we had talked about some of our earlier meetings was smaller scale
Yeah.
developments within neighborhoods. And I
Right.
think that's a tool that's one step beyond this. And so I think the thing is that planning and zoning were to say, no way, no how, we're not doing that. I'm not sure they're going to go for a smaller scale, middle housing type of approach, even on this map in the darker green areas. They're just going to say, perhaps not. So, but I think the DRD is an approach that we can look at all the developments around town and say, look, those worked well. Maybe we could find a way to reinvigorate this and then look beyond. We good with this page?
Yes.
Yeah.
Next strategy is explore ways to deed restrict existing units. This is a longer term challenge because it involves money, right? The people aren't going to put deed restrictions on existing units without either tax incentives or money. And so this is going to involve some exploration on how to make this happen. I think, Steve, you had mentioned at an earlier meeting, this concept of buy local, which is with Hope Partnership or with others, we could perhaps team up to buy and deed restrict units and get them to count or whatever. There are ways to do this, but it's going to take time and money.
Yeah, my note to myself that I wrote on this page was get some local or new nonprofit to take up awareness, cultivating donations, et cetera, because it's not going to happen without significant marketing. And we need
Well-
some sort of existing something in town to take that up.
Mhm.
I will offer a counterpoint of view here. This
Okay.
is actually part of what we currently do.
Mhm.
So we have used our community development block grant program for many years to help revitalize existing housing stock as well as acquire it with a deed restriction in place. We've done that with Operation Hope. We've done it with private owners of property. In fact, currently, we're in negotiations with an owner, a purchaser of a single-family home who wants to rehab it, rent it out as to a Section 8 tenant, and we would enter into a restrictive covenant for a period of time based on the rehab monies that we provide to him. So the thing that we haven't explored, where we've talked about it, is whether or not we could also use another tool in our toolkit, which is providing tax abatements or tax credits to facilitate affordable housing. And again, we do have an ordinance currently that allows us to do that. We've done it for Operation Hope, for Parish Court, for Sullivan McKinney. Could that be utilized as a more effective tool to encourage, you know, units to be restricted? So I think there's a lot, but the only thing I would say is cautionary is it's small numbers. It's hard to take the scale, both in terms of funding limitations, and there's not that many people that are very interested in it, regardless of whether you make money available for free or at low cost.
But you did do well with Operation Hope.
Yeah, for a period of time.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good program, just, you know, it's hard to scale.
So based on our prior conversation, I had demoted the discussion about tax incentives as a way to kind of encourage and support new developments. I think based on Mark's comment, I'm prepared to add that back in here at strategy number 5. Because I think that there can be ways with tax increment financing or tax rebates or tax incentives to encourage things like that to happen. I think it could make the difference in some situations as part of a kind of a package approach. So if the committee's comfortable, I'd like to go ahead and add that back in. Is that okay?
That's, yeah, 5, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Fine.
So the next goal overall is maintaining and improving oversight and administration of deed restricted units. I think the town already does a good job in this regard. I think reviewing and updating the standard housing affordability plan is in here, requiring, modifying the zoning regulations to require its use as part of any development so that everybody's on the same page. I recently came across a horror story in another municipality that just really, nobody was watching what was going on and it got out of control. So we're very fortunate to have Mark to be able to manage and oversee this, but I also think having a standard plan that's current and up to date would be a good step forward. The other strategies related to this are the standard deed restriction document, require its use as part of every project. I think strategy number 3 is requiring the use of an approved administrator. That could be the town, it could be housing authority, it could be some of the independent third-party administrators. But I think requiring that the administrator be qualified, experienced, and capable of performing the work. And you can't just switch it to your brother-in-law because he's an accountant. That just sort of doesn't work. So maintaining some level of control that the town would always approve the administrator and say, yep, okay, you're qualified, or, you know, you haven't demonstrated you have the qualifications that are necessary. So this is some of the stuff that's under the hood, if you will, but I think it's tremendously important.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it goes closer to the front or closer to the back. So right now it's like right smack in the middle.
Okay, one thing we need to do, Glenn, is we're the Affordable Housing Committee, not Affordable Housing Commission. And there are
okay.
significant differences between what a commission does and a committee does. And I guess we use those words interchangeably sometime, but we're listed as a committee in the website.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll clean that up.
I've always struggled with that because I think the committee has morphed over the years in terms of different designations. And so I thought you had been made a commission at one point, so that's my bad.
No, you
Thank
see, we probably should be. We have no rights really of approval of anything. And you say specifically approved, but all we do is make a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Committee, and that's been a bone of contention among some people who feel we should actually have more rights of approval of a lot of other things, like designs that might be brought to us or whatever, but that's a whole other can of worms I don't think we need to get into at this particular moment, although maybe we do. But we are the committee.
I'll make that change.
Okay.
Mark, updating the standard housing affordability plan and the deed restriction document implies, it should imply that it should be updated every so many years. And who's got the responsibility to, after 3 years, say, hey, now it's time to revise and update?
Good question.
Is that TPZ? Is that Fourth Housing
Well,
Committee? Is that your office?
right now, the requirement, rests with TP&Z through their regs. They're required to provide that. They do have, thanks to the work of this committee, a model affordability plan and model deed restrictions. But to your point, those should be looked at now that we have several years of experience, and we should make whatever revisions we do or would like to make to those at this point.
But we would not make them, TP&Z would.
I think right now it's set up as a regulatory scheme under their zoning regs. It requires, as part of the application, that they submit an affordability plan for the commission's review and approval. They always ask for, at least staff, review of those submittals. But, and in the past, the committee has weighed in as well, but a lot of it tends to be boilerplate. The question is whether the boilerplate is accurate, is adequate right now.
Yeah.
I do think, it should be, we should look at it.
I agree.
So I think my sense in the perfect world would be sort of a two-pronged approach. Number one is the preparation and maintenance of the model housing affordability plan, I think, should rest with the committee. The requirement that the model affordability plan be used should be in the zoning regulations. But if a developer comes along and has a proposal for a slight modification or tweak to the housing affordability plan, that might be part of the planning and zoning review, but I would suggest they request input from the Affordable Housing Committee as to whether or not that's a prudent change, because otherwise, again, we're just going to end up with kind of a little bit of a nightmare. So I might, let me think about how to supplement this wording to make that a little clearer.
We really don't have a to-do list or a calendar for the Affordable Housing Committee, and there are certain responsibilities that we should take on. And
No, I agree with exactly what you planned, and that's kind of how it's set up. Maybe it just needs to be clarified in terms of that, the Affordable Housing Committee's role,
Yeah.
As it relates to this. So I think it does make sense.
Anything else in section 4.3? Again, these are mostly, I think, administrative type things, but important nonetheless. Section 4.4 is continue to seek moratorium and exemptions from the affordable housing appeals process here. I think, Mark, if I understood your updated spreadsheet, we're even closer than we were before in terms of getting to the moratorium. We're only like 35 points away now, or 36?
More like 40, but not close enough.
No, I know. Yeah, we're not going to make it by the time the number resets, perhaps, but probably sometime. Do you think in 2022 is probably our time frame?
I wish that were the case. Right now, the issue is we have a lot of projects that have been approved, but if you look at what's actually coming out of the ground in terms of what's under construction that realistically would be CO'd in 2022, those units are not enough to push us over the threshold by themselves.
no,
It's unfortunate there are a couple projects that have been in limbo or in litigation that by themselves would have put us over the threshold had they started by now, but that's, can't cry over spilled milk at this point, so.
Yep. All right.
It is what it is. We're gonna have to look at different options here.
So this section, this goal, if you will, is to continue our efforts. Number one is to obtain moratoria. And then the second, which is continue to work towards an exemption. Good.
Yes.
Strategy 4.5 is, goal 4.5 is consider additional approaches provide for housing diversity. And so this now looks at ways which may or may not be deed restricted, but that we could perhaps provide for other types of housing opportunities. Now, this again is a sensitive area which involves the juxtaposition of the Affordable Housing Committee and Planning and Zoning. We had some conversation with staff about the idea in the Residence B or the Residence A district, Residence C, could we make tweaks or changes with regard to 2, 3, or 4 family dwellings? And the issue was, we're not going to get that specific. So we backed off and just suggest to the Planning and Zoning Commission that there might be other ways to explore middle housing. And some of those could be, for example, cottage courts or pocket neighborhoods, street front townhouses, mixed-use buildings, or other things like that. And that kind of touches on what we were talking about earlier, Carrie and I, in terms of the 250 feet of an arterial road and other things. But it's a way to see if there's interest on the part of the Planning and Zoning Commission to providing for additional housing diversity. And that also goes on to the next strategy, which is facilitating mixed-use development in business zones. The business zones right now do have some caps in terms of the percent of square footage or other provisions that apply with regard to business development. And there can be opportunities if some of those restrictions or limitations are removed, that we could perhaps have additional residential development in and near business areas, either through an increase in the floor area of building or allowing more of the floor area to be used for residential purposes, but keeping, let's say, the ground floor for business uses, et cetera. So again, these are perhaps housing opportunities, not necessarily affordable housing, but there might be some options here.
We have only one mixed use in town, Black Rock?
Question was whether we have more than one mixed use in town.
We've got inclusionary zoning, but.
Yeah, I would say those inclusionary zoning units include some mixed use developments, but 1838 is kind of a unique situation because the town provided land through a ground lease that essentially allowed them to meet their parking requirements in exchange for, 6 deed restricted units. So it was a very novel approach to that problem, and I thought, very creative. So there may be opportunities to do something like that again.
Yep. I agree.
And I think with the way the business market is sort of changing, there are perhaps situations where we could explore some other creative solutions too. So that's what this.
This was what Joanne had mentioned in the last meeting, where, we're seeing some conversion of second floor office to residential, and there might be opportunities within that to get some additional units. At least, again, to your point, it provides additional housing options that may not be deed restricted in the traditional sense, but it does provide some additional diversity.
So where Bob's clothing store is, could you ever see a time where we would allow them to add a second story there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing on Black Rock Turnpike on some of those developments?
Well, some of those, I'm thinking of one on Black Rock Turnpike that already did get approved. It was actually approved for office. Maybe they want to build it as residential, so small. But there's several examples already where people are taking second floor office in town and converting them to units of residential. It's not large, but they tend to be smaller buildings anyway. So it is happening, to Joanne's point. So it is an opportunity for us. Good.
Studio and loft apartments are very popular.
Yep.
On second floor.
And I think the Fairfield zoning regulations contain some provisions that create little sort of roadblocks along the way for certain things. And I think
Well, if you're in a mixed use zone, you can do both. You can have your residential upstairs and you can have your commercial downstairs.
But some of the zones have limitations on the amount of floor area. So for example, I think one of the regulations is no more than 50% of the building floor area. So if you have a 3-story building, that
Right.
sort of almost requires you to have a story and a half of commercial, and that half-story of commercial on the second floor perhaps doesn't have a market for it. So I think the issue should be, we should try to preserve ground floor to the extent that we can, but give the commission, the planning and zoning commission, a little flexibility here in terms of how they think about that as to what would work best in a certain situation. And if we can get some deed restricted units out of it, that'd be awesome.
I
Well,
think,
the-
I think the commission is actually going in that direction, so this may hit the receptive audience, so that's.
Yep.
The loft apartments are actually beneficial because they're basically a small area, but with a bedroom upstairs. So you're not having a very large floor plan.
Yep.
They have those in a lot of different buildings. So, I mean, and those are great for kids coming home from college or whatever.
Yep.
I mean, they're not beneficial for people with families, but for singles, or seniors or veterans.
Studio.
Well, a loft might have a bathroom and then a kitchen and a big area. And
It's a studio.
It's basically an open floor plan with a loft up on top, is what I'm talking about. I think we probably have a lot of places in Fairfield that could be done that way if we could get the, people to agree upon it.
I'll go ahead and craft that. In strategy number 3 here, I think that this is possibly one, it relates to ways to guide the design of multifamily and mixed-use development. And it seems to me that we've talked about this enough. I'm wondering if this should be elevated to the level of an overall goal. So maybe we go from 6 goals to 7, but I think my sense is that we got strong input and feedback that design is important to people.
It's very important.
So I think if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to move this out to its own level and highlight the issues related to design.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
And then I think section 4.6 is maintain and enhance other affordable housing programs, maintain and enhance the housing trust fund, continue to seek ways to attract and retain rental assistance units, continue to efforts to attract buyers receiving mortgage assistance, both tenant rental certificates and CHFA mortgages or USDA mortgages count to the affordable housing appeals list. So if we can attract more of those units, we get credit for them, and they're not new units, they're going in existing units. And so that could be beneficial for the town. The concept here is this issue about tax increment financing and tax abatements. And I think based on what I said earlier, I think that might go, maybe we should put that back in the deed restricted section. And then the last strategies are, again, just continue the overall affordable housing efforts that the committee works on. And possibly at some time in the future, consider creating workforce housing. This is a tough one. I had a conversation before with the committee where we talked about the fact whether this would dilute efforts from focusing on the 60 and 80% deed restricted set aside. We don't really get moratorium points for these or anything else like that, but there can also be housing needs for people at 80 to 120% of AMI. How do you feel about this? Leave it in or take it out? What's the committee's thoughts?
do you talk about workforce housing at your economic development meetings?
Not much. I think it's important probably, if if the Affordable Housing Committee is not advocating for workforce housing, there's really no one else that will be doing it. So, the issue, however, is how much emphasis do you put on it? I think it's probably in the right spot. There's a lot of attention obviously focused on how do we reassert control and get out from under 830G by getting enough points for moratorium, and, you know, what's our percentage of affordable units? And unfortunately, the state doesn't recognize or reward efforts that go outside of the 80% threshold. So I think, you know, this might be a difficult one for us to convince others. See our goals more narrowly defined, but I do think it's an important component that we should at least include in our work.
So I agree with that. The only community I know, I think that has it is Westport, I think has enacted it. And I don't know what their success rate has been, if they've developed anything.
Steve.
Does Norwalk have one too? Joanne, do you know?
I was raised in Westport in workforce housing.
Yeah,
Okay, I only lived in Norwalk for 40 years. I won't tell you how old I am. With the housing that I was raised in, we were one of the first families, and it was built for returning soldiers, policemen, firemen, and city officials to keep people in their own towns. Okay, because back in the day, you had to live in the town you worked in if you were a policeman or a fireman. So that's where it's Hales Court. I'm sure, Steve, you've seen it. They used to
Yeah.
be single family homes. Now they're duplexes. And to me, that's my biggest thing that I'd love to see in Fairfield, though, that is pocket housing. And that brings communities together. You have veterans, you have elderly, you have workforce, you have families. And it brings communities together. And that's how we grew up. We were 48 one family families. We were all like one big family. And I just think that's what we need to start looking at. I don't know what you think, but workforce housing, family housing, senior, veteran, I think this is our biggest concern.
I would say senior housing is a really big concern based on demographics.
Absolutely.
And we have to, at some point, I don't know whether it's in this document or not, we have to consider what Jan always would be talking about, which is ADA apartments, having enough of those. I don't know what's required. And the
Yep.
other thing I think that's happening is just north and east of us, mostly east of us, a lot of what's going on in Bridgeport right now, right on our border, would be considered workforce housing available to a lot of people at a lower rate in new construction, convenient to Metro North. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out.
Gary, you're talking about the new apartments where the theaters used to be?
Yeah, that's certainly one of them, but even just going north on Fairfield Avenue, I've just seen that there's a lot of stuff brewing in Bridgeport right now, throughout Bridgeport.
Yeah, they're coming up around where the theaters used to be.
Yeah. Mhm.
But the ADA, I believe any of these new units have to be ADA compliant anyway.
I don't know if it's any, I think they have to have, some number must be ADA, but I'm not sure what it is.
Correct.
But I remember Jan always talked about this a lot.
Right, the accessibility has to have ADAs, from what I understand, working with ADA and stuff.
Or if they have to do 2 units, get them to do 3 or 4. You know what we would give
Well,
them.
the building itself has to be ADA compliant. Not so much every unit.
The entrance to the building itself has to be ADA compliant to
Absolutely.
public access, but I'm not sure about the requirement in terms of number of units for residential.
So I think
Well,
I like this
there is
conversation here. What I'm going to suggest is that, as Mark had indicated, make strategy 6, leave it in, but make it perhaps a lower priority, but also add in a standard or a recommendation with regard to what's called universal design. And
Yes.
Universal design is the concept of housing that's really available and useful for people of all ages and capabilities.
Yep.
So we can
all for that.
advocate for that, so that a unit being affordable is sort of a financial thing, but a unit being accessible is kind of unrelated to that. So I'm going to add that in as a recommendation here as
Yeah.
well.
The workforce housing, reminds me of the housing that was built in the fifties, all of the small capes and the ranches that returning, veterans or the people who worked in the factories in Bridgeport, moved into. We still have some of those, but when they come up for sale, they sell for $350, get knocked down and become $800,000 houses. How do we, is there a way for us to create some of those? And the workforce housing, in my mind, is part of that. So newly married couples, something that they could afford, I think would be great, or returning students.
We
Whatever.
talked about this as part of the planning and zoning meeting. You may recall that Emmeline brought up the issue about sort of floor area ratios, that
Mhm.
if we look at a piece of property, if it's not regulated, generally speaking, a builder is going to max out the square footage because that's how they get the most dollars. Max square footage at what the market will bear on a per square foot price, and that's the sale price, generally not as affordable. On the other hand, if we were to say that a piece of property has an FAR of a certain amount of square footage, and no unit can exceed, I'm just picking a number here, 600 square feet or 700 or whatever the number is. The issue ends up being you would get smaller capes. They couldn't be added on to as families grew, people sort of have to move out or whatever. So, I mean, there are, zoning regulations or tools that could do things like that, but it's quite a bit different from the way things have been done.
That's huge. That's a huge change. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's just got many, many implications.
It does, and I think, it could be a revision to, or we could mention it as part of the design residence district that, are we focused on units per acre? Or are we focused on square feet per acre, which is sort of the whole issue of building bulk and everything else? So, what's the right approach there? So maybe what I'll just do is add a note in the conversation about DRD, is that perhaps they could look at ways to enable or restrict the smaller units.
600 is a little small.
No, I know 600 is.
Yeah.
But I think when you go back to some of the capes that Steve was just mentioning that were built sort of in the 50s, and you look at them, some of them were 20 by 30.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising, but that's what they were. I think if I have enough information, I believe, to start crafting a draft plan, I'd like your go ahead and do that. I'd have it back for our meeting in January, roughly at least a week in advance of our meeting. That would give us a document now to sort of look at the tone, configuration, layout, and everything else and start to share it more widely. What's the committee's thoughts? Are we ready to go there yet?
I have a couple questions. If I did my math correctly, if I counted right, Glenn, there were 20 strategies. And I'm not quite sure of the leader/partner role. Out of the 20, more than 10 had the Affordable Housing Committee as the leader/partner. And I'm not sure what's expected of the committee or of DECD or planning and zoning. Can you explain your thoughts on that a little bit more?
I think the Affordable Housing Committee, there's a number of things related to affordable housing that you and Mark are going to be the leads on because you have the knowledge and expertise. I was concerned as this was getting put together that there were many recommendations that involve planning and zoning. And I think it's important as part of the evolution of the conversation or discussion of affordable housing in Fairfield that if we can't get planning and zoning to make changes to the regulations, we're going to struggle to create affordable housing units, except through 830G, which is going to go to planning and zoning anyway. So I think that my sense right now is that trying to effectuate meaningful changes to the zoning regulations that are appropriate for Fairfield involves the Planning and Zoning Commission. I think that's the logical next step that I see.
Aren't they going to be redoing their zoning regulations in any event?
They are.
Well, some of this should obviously be folded into it. I mean, that's got to be where our push is, I would think.
I think, so my sense, Carrie, because I thought about that, is that if we wait for them to finish the regulations, that could be 2 or 3 years out.
You're right, yeah.
And so my thought was, having worked on regulations in a number of situations, there are so many moving parts that it takes a while for the commission to get to the point they're ready to move ahead.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't freeze us from dealing with some of these housing issues. So if we could get them to move ahead initially and adopt some changes that also make their way through to the draft, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try to put dates on these that involve sort of the next year or 2. Let's try to get this done. So that was my thought process.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't hear any objection, Glenn, so I say you have a green light to go ahead and draft it.
Yeah.
Perfect. I look forward to doing that. I'm kind of excited. I've got some interesting ideas on how to, I think, portray relevant information to help this discussion along. So thank you for your input and feedback on that. And
Our next meeting is January 12th, based on the schedule we just adopted. Would you have time to complete a draft a week prior to it, or should we consider a special meeting devoted to this issue and this issue only later in January, and have our regular meeting in January where we need to deal with our affordable housing annual report to the RTM, which is due in January?
I think
But we could move our dates further down too.
We could, the RTM by ordinance or town code, we're expected to deliver a report regarding the Housing Trust Fund, the RTM, in January. Last year we did February.
Yeah,
No one really called us out on that issue,
okay.
but there's heightened interest
Yeah,
in what we have to say. So if it follows the regular course, the RTM would meet in committee on the 17th and full board on the 24th. You know, we could obviously finalize our annual report at the meeting on the 12th in time for the RTM meetings, but I wasn't sure about Glenn's schedule and, you know, being able to have a
well, I'm perfectly fine with doing a standalone meeting just for the affordable housing plan later in the month.
that's fine with me. I think I'm excited about working on this and getting it together. So I would figure out a way to make it happen on the 12th. But I recognize I'm not your only business, so I don't want to consume all of that time. So I certainly can make another evening available in January if that makes your life easier. What would you guys like?
Why don't we see how it goes? Why don't we keep it on the 12th? And if you're able to deliver a document, we have the ability to consider that. Also, let's do that.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
But Glenn shouldn't kill himself
Right.
if it's gonna be the next month, or I'm sorry, the next week.
Yeah, no, I think I'm very cognizant of the statutory deadline that we're working within, and I want to meet and exceed your objectives and then begin to share with others in the community and have plenty of time to do that. I don't want us to feel rushed. So I am comfortable with January 12th and I'll be ready.
Now, the goal is that Glenn's gonna deliver a document that could then be given to the public in some fashion, right, to TP&Z or other interested groups. It'll be posted, but it's still a draft.
Still a draft.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I generally, my normal work protocol would be that I would deliver it to Mark a week in advance of the meeting. So it would be in town hall sometime around January 5. The meeting on the 12th, It's a public document, but it is a draft. Based on your comments on the 12th, I would make changes to it. And then at that point in time, I think that could be ready for posting in a more public way or circulation, and we can make that decision when we see it in January.
Okay,
Perfect.
Thank you.
sounds great.
I'll stay on. I'm interested in some of the other things on your agenda. Thank you very much, and everybody have a happy holiday.
You too, Glenn.
Thanks, you too, Glenn. Yeah, so there is we haven't gotten very far with, we've done some community engagement with different groups. Not as much as I would like with neighborhood groups, which was a key constituency in our last plan update. And, we simply ran out of time before we got into the holiday rush. But I think, this might be a good, point, once we have a draft report and you're comfortable with, the committee's comfortable with the recommendations, then we can restart our engagement with various neighborhood groups, bring them up to date as to what we're doing, get some initial, feedback in terms of the strategies we're considering, re-engage with the Planning and Zoning Commission, take all that input back, and then finalize our report, probably after doing something more formal in terms of having some workshops or things of that nature.
So when does the RTM see a draft? When does the Board of Selectmen see a draft?
We didn't make a very concerted effort to talk to them as a body. Certainly individual members of the board and RTM participated in workshops in that process, but we didn't actually meet with them to review a draft. It was, I think, we could, but I thought it was more important that we got, some input from neighborhood groups, different organizations and stakeholders beyond the political leadership that ultimately will have to review the plan. But, I think we want to be open throughout this process. I wouldn't certainly do anything to exclude them. They're clearly aware of what we're doing. That's going to be a major component in our report to the RTM. Spent the last year largely working on updating the affordable housing plan in advance of the June 2022 deadline. And these are the things that we've done, and these are the things that we're considering. So, but I leave it up to you. Some of these groups are groups that we don't typically, that aren't as engaged maybe in this process, but until something happens, and then obviously they're very focused on it, I think this is an opportunity to provide information, educate them on what we can and cannot do, what the law does provide or doesn't provide, and what we're doing to address this issue, and then, obviously get some thoughts as to the strategies we're outlining as to whether or not they think they're any good.
Well, are you anticipating giving a document to the Board of Selectmen and the RTM as basically a finished document or 99% finished?
Well, I'll defer to your judgment, but I think it probably makes sense when we have a draft, we let them know, here's a draft.
Yeah.
And they would be invited to the workshops that we plan on having, so.
Okay, that's all I want.
Yeah.
I think that they should have a chance
Yeah.
to comment before it's done.
I wasn't planning to meet with the RTM or Board of Selectmen as a board and preview a draft of the document specific to that.
Give the document.
Let them know.
If you have comments,
Yeah.
please give us your
Right.
comments. Yeah.
So I did, the one other thing that's on, couple quick updates,
Yeah.
if I may. So 244 Greenfield Street, for those of you who, perhaps listened in, I don't know if any of you did earlier this week, but, after extensive, questioning, and considerable discussion, the RTM did vote 35-4 to approve the purchase of 244 Greenfield Street. We are planning to close later this week. I have had some preliminary conversations with some nonprofit, development entities, to explore their interest in partnering with the town, to do something that's more conventional, that works within the existing development envelope. We have laid it out as basically a two duplex lots and 4 units of affordable housing. There were questions about whether or not the site could support more, which it can. But there was also concern about being sensitive to neighborhood issues and concerns, providing an appropriate landscape buffer, all those things as well. So you have competing interests or objectives there. And I think, it's for us, again, I've said this before, one of the reasons that we're interested in 244 is because the town owns property immediately to the rear, which makes this workable. And, one of the ways in which we can best create affordable housing is to, provide land like we've done before, for folks to do this type of thing. But we'd like to make sure it's affordable for the long term and truly affordable. So I think there is interest from the development community to do something like this. And so the next step would be to close, prepare a survey and RFP or RFQ really, and entertain qualification statements from potential development partners.
To go over the land again, how big is the plot that we're buying?
So the plot that we're buying is quite small. It's a legally conforming,
Non-conforming?
pre-existing, single-family home in a Residence B zone. And it is, of course, I don't have the exact square footage here, but
You could ask him.
Right,
But I
have
mean,
it up
it's
on-
not much bigger than the house, is my
Have it up on
recollection.
Zillow if you wanna.
yeah, it's very small.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's-
The lot size there.
Let me see if it says the lot size on here.
It is 0.065 acres,
Oh, 6,
2,825 square feet.
yeah. And so the town is the best person to buy it because we have other land we can attach to it and we can then make it a proper kind of
Correct.
setup. But it's gonna be affordable the same way that the Navy housing was affordable. And so the people might buy it for $260 or something, and they can only get a very small increase
Correct.
in value. But they do get Fairfield.
Right. So, I will keep you posted, but it was approved.
So who is gonna sell the units?
Well, the way that I would, propose this is to work with a development partner that would essentially design, construct, and oversee the sale of the units, with obviously our involvement and support.
Yeah.
In terms of securing the site plan approval from planning and zoning, through the sale of the units, and for which we can provide down payment and closing cost assistance to income eligible buyers, we would be their partner. But we would ask them to bring equity to the table, their expertise, and largely, take the leading role in terms of overseeing the development of
And
the site.
what do they get out of it?
They get the potential, to, as part of their development budget, perhaps get something.
A little development fee.
Development fee
Yeah.
associated with that, other than doing their
We
good
got
work,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
So, it's a very, I think Steve and I were discussing this before the meeting, but it's a very, skinny,
Mhm.
development pro forma, based on what the expected sale price would be. If you're doing for sale units, that are affordable to folks at 80% AMI, you know, the upper end of that sale range would probably be no more than 250. If you're doing 4 duplex, that means you would yield $1 million gross, and probably your development costs are equal to, if not more than, $1 million for 4 units.
Yep.
Not including the land.
Mhm.
So that underscores, you know, the issue. That's why it's hard to do affordable, true affordable housing, unless you're doing it, you know, where you have some, in the case of a private developer, you're subsidizing those units with market rate units that cover those costs.
We're gonna close this week.
We're gonna close this week and then hopefully go out quickly with a RFQ. And we would do the same thing with Parkview Commons. I think, we're at a point, obviously, as you know, we have 4 properties for which we own, have full site control. We've talked to 2 or 3 other property owners within the same development. There is interest, but, you know, not immediate desire to sell their units. But by the time we bring a development partner on board and work through a range of issues relative to our respective roles, I think, you know, there might be an opportunity to acquire additional property. So I think at this point, we'll test the market, see what's available in terms of folks that are interested in partnering with us to redevelop that site, and, you know, see where it goes.
Good.
So that's, I don't have any further report on Hero Street, our conversations with the Housing Authority, and the potential of acquiring the old St. Emery's school and convent, but that's certainly out. I know they've been talking to the parish about that. They're looking for some additional financing from the state, from other sources, but I do believe that, you know, Carol is very resourceful and can find the money, if need be, to obtain site control for that property. I think it's a good development opportunity.
She did not file for low-income housing tax credits.
She did not.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I think the applications were due a couple of months ago, so.
And I don't, you know, I did provide the moratorium status report. There's really not much in the way of change. I did add, we're still waiting for the 2020 census numbers officially. Based on some preliminary redistricting numbers, they had indicated that Fairfield's housing inventory grew slightly to 21,982 units, and 2% of that would be 440, which is a 7-point increase over the current threshold. But I will note too that the American Community Survey had estimated more than 22,000 housing units last year. You know, that's, the ACS numbers are generally less reliable. They're a projection estimate, but the census has had its share of problems too.
Yeah.
So we're waiting to see what the final numbers are, but I put that in there just so we could see what the potential impact might be.
But it's not gonna be, they can't be that far off.
It will not be huge.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good news, bad news situation. It will reset. Bad news. Good news is it doesn't look like it's gonna have a huge impact in terms of, you know, the points necessary to achieve a moratorium. On the other hand, you know, 7 points is 7 points when we're trying to scratch together where we can, so that's an issue.
You've got Greenfield on here? On your list?
I didn't put Greenfield on here yet, but Greenfield will be on there.
I was just trying, Greenfield's gonna be 4 family units.
Correct.
And so we're gonna get more points out of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the last thing, I did provide or share with you, at least in terms of my, the items that, were on my agenda for tonight, a draft of our annual report, which is based on, the format that we've used in years past. And I would, we've traditionally included an overview of the activities of the committee, which has largely been focused on the Affordable Housing Plan update. We did obviously allocate or disperse some funds from the Housing Trust to allow us to move forward with the redevelopment of Parkview Commons, the purchase of 244 Greenfield Street. There is this statistical component, which I don't know if it has much utility. And one of the issues that I have from a number standpoint is because we don't have access, the 2020 census data has not yet been officially released. There's really no material change in some of these key metrics or numbers. And so I question whether or not we want to, include it as a provision. I get more
about page 3.
Yeah, I'm talking about the key statistical data, and then obviously we do need to provide an update. There's a lot of interest in where we are as it relates to moratorium, and there's a statutory or a requirement per town code to report on the status of the Housing Trust Fund and any disbursements that have been made this past year. And then lastly, I get a lot of questions, and so it's not part of our it hasn't been part of our report, but, a component of something like this, the moratorium tracker that lists the actual developments that contribute points towards a moratorium, that essentially our inventory of affordable housing units in some summary form might be a component. We have provided a map that shows the geographic location of units, and we've provided a summary of our affordable housing plan goals and the actions taken and where we stand on those. So I just wanted to get some feedback from you as to what you think would be what's missing, what should be included in this report, what would you like to see or not see? That's why I wanted to.
Yeah.
I threw it out there.
I've got some comments, but let's see. Gwen, any?
I think inventory should be included.
Yeah. Carrie?
I actually like the statistical page, but I'm wondering if part of that shouldn't be included in what Glenn is working on. I mean, I thought that was really interesting, the statistical page, just to know, maybe the numbers can be updated as you get them. But, it was just pretty interesting. The average household size, what are the implications? Like all of a sudden our household size is growing, and why is that? And median price.
Point that Glenn should include some information.
I think Glenn will have the benefit of some time.
Yeah, he might have the benefit.
I'm cognizant of the fact that we have to provide, we're supposed to provide a report in January.
Okay.
And the way we set it up, not that we need to set it up exactly this way, but there really isn't a change from last year to the current year in terms of some of these key statistical metrics.
I think it's important that they see the information. And one thing that I think we should add to this list is, what's the affordable income? And it's not 139,000, it's,
Yep.
what is it, 80,000?
Yep.
Something like that. And that's really what for sale affordable is gonna be,
Yep.
looking at. So, And I think it's important that they understand that the meeting is 675,000.
I didn't update any of this yet, so I
Yeah.
just wanna know if
Okay,
we should,
so,
if we should update it.
so I like that.
Okay. Everyone like to keep it in some form. Carrie's nodding yes. Steve says yes.
I am. Yeah, I think it should be
Great.
in some form. And maybe one just paragraph about the impact of the pandemic on the Affordable Housing Committee, or, you know, kind of how things
Oh.
changed this year because of that.
Yep,
Um,
good point.
and what was that point? I'm sorry.
Impact of the pandemic on.
Oh,
you know,
yes,
I'll put that in the initial paragraph,
yeah.
how it's affected our meeting. Yeah, Gwen thought the inventory would be an important
Yeah,
component,
yeah.
so, you know. I can easily put it together from existing,
Mhm.
and then we can see whether you think it fits or doesn't fit, so.
Off the top of your head, do you know if there's a lot of inventories left?
Well, the inventory I'm talking about is those that are actually, deed restricted as affordable.
Mhm.
And I would, you know, it's a subset of this. It actually depends how we want to define it. If we want to define it as those that might potentially contribute points towards a moratorium, it is a subset of this.
Okay.
If it's broader affordable housing inventory, it's this plus other units that may be restricted for less than 40 years, of which we have number, or that may have been restricted, or built prior to 1990, which is another component. The only issue that I have with a broader inventory is it does include, a number of, private homes that are, you know, kind of owner-operator type situations where we sometimes don't include that. It's like we redact the address, so we don't want to necessarily stigmatize
Mhm.
folks. So we share that obviously with the Department of Housing, but we don't broadcast it. So it's, that would be the only hesitation there, so.
I think you should put in, you think it's correct, and then,
Okay, I'll put something together and have you guys react to it. How's that?
Okay.
for the trust fund, on the last page, I think there should be some sentence about the borrowing capacity,
Yep,
which is $1.2 million.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the authority to borrow money against the housing trust fund. I've opted not to do that because I wasn't sure that we would be able to extricate ourselves and pay it back, under the existing development pro forma, so that I didn't wanna do that without a firm exit plan. But it's a nice thing.
Yep. And so the balance right now, is it 54,000?
Yeah, that has to be updated. I'll get this information as of the 31st to be consistent.
Yep.
But we were doing a year snapshot, so we carried forward the balance from last year. And then we adjust for any fees that was collected during the current year, any disbursements made from the fund, and then show a balance as of the end of the year. That seems like a,
And do these numbers include the developments at Sacred Heart and Fairfield
they
Union?
do,
Yeah,
they do.
okay.
A significant component of our inclusionary zoning fees comes from both universities. Because,
Probably increased the tuition by $10 or something.
probably not even that, but, that was part of the intent.
Yeah.
I have a question about something, which is,
Yes.
seems to be this survey going around by Survey Monkey about ADUs. I don't know who did that survey.
Is it a good survey?
I didn't want to take it because, you know, I didn't know whose it was. But,
Oh.
but Mary got a copy, I got a copy. Did anybody of you get a copy? And TP&Z didn't do it, and Herb, if you're there, I'm pretty sure we didn't do it. FSA didn't do it, so we don't know who is circulating this survey about accessory dwelling units.
I will say that, planning and zoning is planning, to take up 3 issues right after the new year.
Yeah.
One of which is, the ADU legislation that was enacted by the state legislature this past year does give communities the opportunity to opt out of the provisions. There's also the new state law regarding cannabis sales, and I think the other one pertains to parking requirements for zoning. So I think the commission is going to take up each one of those issues probably early in the new year. There'll be a public hearing. My bet is that certainly, and the members that were on the call with us indicated, as it relates to ADUs, at least staff indicated that it's likely they'll opt out. There's no opt out partially and opt in partially, so there will likely opt out because of the concern that it has to be applied universally to all residential districts in Fairfield, including the Beach District, which is that very narrow area next to Fairfield Beach Road. So there's some concern about doing it there, but I believe they will also take this opportunity to revisit some of the amendments they recently made and perhaps make some additional tweaks to allow for ADUs in residential districts like the B and C zone, which are currently excluded, and perhaps also extend the detached ADU into more zones other than just the AAA. So I think it's going to be, sounds to me like they're considering making some additional modifications that would be helpful, but they don't want to necessarily tie themselves fully to the statutory language that was adopted.
Correct.
We've got some funds, or you have some funds, that we could give to homeowners to legalize ADU units, existing ones, if they were to deed restrict them.
Right.
And the fact that they have to deed restrict them makes the money not quite as attractive, I'm assuming.
Well, we haven't really put it out. What stopped this? I mean, that's something we talked about, which is how to incentivize people to create deed-restricted ADUs that we would get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And really, there's a couple of tools that immediately come to mind. One is giving people a break on their taxes through a tax credit or tax abatement of some sort. There's a statutory provision to do that, I believe. And then there's also, directly financing the conversion or rehab of the units or creation of the ADUs, by which we could, get a benefit by having them deed restrict the unit. The only thing, the one issue that is of concern is there's so much attention focused on doing affordable housing that results in points towards a moratorium, that I wasn't sure how receptive other boards might be if there wasn't that payoff in the end. If we were just getting it for the broader inventory, but we weren't getting points out of it, whether people would be as excited to do that. And the issue really is there's the 830G allows for ADUs to be accounted towards the broader inventory with a 10-year restriction. And I would read the statute in such a way that, would count towards moratorium points, but that's not an opinion shared by the Department of Housing, who says that in order for it to count towards moratorium points, you'd need a 40-year restriction, which seems very burdensome. I suspect, not too many people would take advantage of that. So that's something we could do, for sure.
I think there's so much information we don't know about the pandemic and the Omicron virus and what's happening. I mean, I think it's just a really quickly changing landscape right now. So on every front.
And to the broader point on ADUs, as we've talked before, we haven't done because of the pandemic, we haven't done a whole lot of marketing
Right.
around ADUs at this point either, so, you know, we have pamphlets and brochures, thanks to the work of Fairfield Senior Advocates, which we can make available, but we're gonna do a workshop, and that's another thing we talked about, you know, sometime.
Yeah, no, Herb is aware of all that. But it's such a funny time right now.
Just anecdotally, I passed 2 houses for sale that had a little sign at the bottom that says in-law. or-
Yep.
Yeah, there's one on North Benson.
So, any other thoughts on the annual report? I'll revise. If anyone does have any other comments, feel free to shoot me a note. But
You're
then
gonna
I
revise-
can get it back to you,
Yeah,
in advance of our next meeting, on the 12th, and hopefully we can finalize it.
and maybe we could finalize it before that. I mean, if you
Well,
have.
we need to have a meeting to do that.
Sounds
But
good.
we can continue to refine it and then present it
Right.
Yeah.
for final approval.
So
at
you'll send it
12.
to us as soon as it's available?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of the information probably isn't gonna be available until after 12/31. So it'll be very early in the new year.
Yeah.
But, so you do have a little bit more time if there's anything else that pops up. You said, geez, I wish we would talk about this, or something else is missing, we should discuss, you know, you can always send me a note, so. And that is it. That's all that I had. under my-
I have nothing more. Terry, Heather, Joanne?
Nothing, more. I think this works very well. Actually, I think technically this works. And but we'll probably have to continue it. So I'm happy with it.
Well, clearly, the intent here is, and most boards and commissions are continuing to meet virtually,
Yeah,
including the major ones, but, and so part of it is that we have a limitation in terms of the meeting room space that can accommodate these type of hybrid meetings. But I think the expectation is where we do have in-person meetings, there needs to be a remote option for folks
yeah,
going forward.
yeah.
Good. So it's gonna be something that's gonna stay with us. Yeah.
Okay.
All
I
right.
think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Holidays.
To everybody.